Hello, hello, hello. Today we are doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be talking about a technique that I like to use to analyze literature. Now, this technique can work with children, it can work with teenagers, it can work with adults. It can be good if you are a teacher and you want to give your students a really practical way to look closely at a particular text or a piece of literature. It can be great if you're a teacher from probably second or third grade all the way up through university. It can also be good if you are a student and you want to have a really practical, simple, and literal way of looking closely at literature. It is one of my favorite techniques in the world. One quick note, I don't actually remember where I learned this. I know I learned it at university when I was studying how to teach English to high school students, but I don't remember which book or if it was kind of one of those trends that arose and nobody can really trace the origin. So I don't know who to give credit to as far as where this technique came from. So whoever came up with it, if you are out there, let me know. Or if you know where this came from, also let me know. All right, let's begin. So the whole idea is that you have a text in front of you, okay? It could be, if you're working with younger children, Dr. Seuss, something from Dr. Seuss, like the Lorax is a good example. It's a story with a powerful, deeper meaning. And if you're working with older students, you might have A Midsummer Night's Dream by Shakespeare. You might be looking at Beowulf. You might be looking at The Catcher in the Rye. You could be looking at The Hunger Games. I don't know. You have your story in front of you. You could also have a poem of any sort. Long poem, short poem, doesn't matter. So you have your text, and if you're looking at a story, obviously you can only do one page or one paragraph at a time as the teacher or as the person analyzing the text. If you're the student, you can decide how much text you want to analyze. So you sit down with your text. If it's from a book, then you might want to make a photocopy of this particular text. So you're like, okay, I want to analyze page 37. Make a photocopy of page 37. This is so you can write your notes on this page. You can annotate the page. After you make your copy, or after you have your annotatable, is that a word? Copy. After you have your copy that can be annotated, I like annotatable. Let's make that a word. After you have your copy that you can write on, then you underline 3 things. 3, only 3, very simple. The first thing, you underline one sentence that you think is most important. Which sentence should you underline? I don't know. Whatever one you think is most important. Second thing, you underline one phrase that you think is most important. Which phrase should you underline? Well, I don't know. I don't live inside your brain, so you have to decide for yourself. You underline one phrase you think is most important. Or highlight. I don't like highlighters though. I think they look kind of ugly. If you're a fan of highlighters though, we welcome all people here, and that's fine. But for me personally, I prefer pencil. The point is, you underline one sentence that you think is most important. Then you underline one phrase that you think is most important. Finally, lastly, you underline one word that you think is most important. Now these can be from different parts of the paragraph or page. They could be from different sentences. You could be beginning, middle, end. It could be all from the same sentence. It could be all toward the end, all toward the beginning, whatever. It is your opinion. You underline one sentence, one phrase, one word that you think is most important, that you think is most prominent, the biggest, the main idea from that paragraph or page or poem or whatever you're analyzing. So what this does is it forces you to think carefully about what you will underline, because you only have one sentence, one phrase, and one word. You have a limited amount, and it forces you to think, okay, what word am I going to choose to claim is the most important? And then if you're doing this for school, you'll have to argue, or you'll have to make a case in front of your classmates. I think that this particular word is most important in this particular paragraph, and this is why. So it forces you to be a little bit introspective about your own thinking about whatever it is that you have read. This can be really useful for in the future if you need to go write an essay about this particular thing that you're reading, or if you need to do a debate about this thing that you're reading, or if your teacher just wants you to do some sort of analysis. If you are a teacher, I think that this technique, we'll call it, method, this little trick, is super useful because one, it tells you, do my students actually know what sentences are? Because as I'm sure all teachers know, sometimes you think, wow, my kids really don't know what a sentence is. Oh dear, maybe we should revisit that. I thought they knew that. So it can be a good way to check up if your students are on track with their grammar vocabulary. Second, it can show you if your students know what a phrase is, especially in the younger years. It becomes important for students to be able to distinguish between a sentence and a phrase. They are different things. Even further, between a sentence, a phrase, and a clause. So you could kind of link your literary study up with your grammar study and springboard your grammar lesson about maybe sentences, phrases, and clauses off of this little analysis that your students have done. And because the students have chosen their sentence, their phrase, and their word all on their own, because they've kind of invested in this particular piece of writing, they're probably going to be more engaged and more excited. Finally, as a teacher and as a student, this will open up the floor of the classroom for a more interesting discussion, because inevitably most people are going to be choosing different sentences, different phrases, and different words. Or maybe, half the class will have chosen the same word and then be like, why? Why did that happen? Why is this word so important in this particular piece of writing? So that's one of my favorite things to do in the English learning classroom. It's super effective, it's super simple to plan, and it opens up the door to so many other possibilities. You can go in a more grammatical analysis route and talk about sentences, phrases, clauses. You can talk about complex sentences, compound sentences. You can talk about compound complex sentences. You can talk about topic sentences. You can talk about a good concluding sentence, a transitional word. You can talk about main idea, all based around that small little exercise that you had gotten your students to prepare independently. Okay, so this first example will be for elementary school students. I'll use the Lorax. It's one of my favorite Dr. Seuss stories. For the purposes of this example, let's say you give the students this page printed out and you say, okay, you have the next 10 minutes to underline one sentence, one phrase, and one word that you think is most important from this page. Think about it really carefully, and then when the 10 minutes is over, we will discuss it and we will talk about it together. There are no right answers and there are no wrong answers. All right, get started. So you presented something like that. So your student might say, okay, I need to read this again. So, Catch calls the onceler, he lets something fall. It's a truffula seed. It's the last one of all. You're in charge of the last of the truffula seeds. And truffula trees are what everyone needs. Plant a new truffula, treat it with care. Give it clean water and feed it fresh air. Grow a forest, protect it from axes that hack. Then the Lorax and all of his friends may come back. And so your student might say, plant a new truffula. That seems to be really important. Plant a new truffula tree. Super important idea in the story of the Lorax. They might also say, the last one of all. That's super important. It's the last seed, because if this seed dies, then we're going to be in a lot of trouble here. And they might also point out the word protect. Now, they could point out different words, but these are the ones that I came up with for this example. And you can see, even just with this little example, that focusing in on a sentence, a phrase, and a word really helps to bring to light, to bring forward the most important elements of the story. Now, maybe another student would choose forest as their word, Maybe another student would choose clean, and they say clean is important because we need to combat the pollution. And then you've got a lovely discussion on your hands led by the students, from the students, that took really minimal preparation on your part, which is fantastic. All right, let's look at an example for older students or older learners. This could be high school, college, postgraduate. All right, so I've got this quote from John Steinbeck's East of Eden. If you'll note the little section in brackets, I did take a small bit out where they kind of go on in the dialogue. I've highlighted the part that is relevant. And you can, as the teacher, you can make that decision yourself as well if you need to take out a little side part that doesn't seem to be super important to what you're talking about. Or you can leave it in and let your students decide. For me, I took it out because there was not enough space. All right, so let's read this together. Now, obviously, if you are doing this in a class, you'll probably have read the book. You do not have to have read the book to understand what this quote is saying, though it's quite general, and that's why I've chosen it as well. In this situation, you have Lee, who is an immigrant to California, a Chinese immigrant, speaking to Cal, one of his friend's sons, about Americans. He spoke softly. "We're a violent people, Cal. Does it seem strange to you that I include myself? Maybe it's true that we're all descended from the restless, the nervous, the criminals, the arguers, the brawlers, but also from the brave and independent and generous. If our ancestors had not been that, they would have stayed in their home plots in the other world and starved over the squeezed out soil. That's why I include myself. We all have that heritage, no matter what old land our fathers left. All colors and blends of Americans have somewhat the same tendencies. It's a breed selected out by accident. And we're so over brave and over fearful, we're kind and cruel as children. We're over friendly with strangers. We boast and are impressed. We're over sentimental and realistic. We are mundane and materialistic. Do you know of any other nation that acts for ideals? We eat too much. We have no taste, no sense of proportion. We throw our energy about like waste. In the old lands, they say of us that we go from barbarism to decadence without intervening culture. Can it be that our critics have not the key or language of our culture? That's what we are, Cal. All of us. You aren't very different." All right, so there's a lot to unpack here, and I'm not particularly interested in unpacking what this means and the whole jumble that is. I'm interested in modeling how this technique works. So if you're interested in talking about Steinbeck more, that's for another video. I have selected this sentence as my sentence. Now, the fun thing about this technique is that you could theoretically, if you were doing like a close analysis literature class, you could give the same paper multiple times during a course and see how you and your students change maybe over the course of a couple of months. So, I might wake up tomorrow morning and read this same passage and think, I think I want to change my sentence. And that is the beauty of this method or this technique, because it can force you to really, really think carefully about what you are picking as important. For the moment, this is what I've chosen. We all have that heritage, no matter what old land our fathers left. I think that this shows that Lee is talking about the multiple different types of immigrants that come to the United States, and that is important in this particular quote. It's important that he's talking about a diverse group of people. I have underlined "selected out by accident" as my phrase. I think that this is super interesting, and it would be super interesting to discuss with students. Are Americans a accidental country? I mean, the US, my home country, has such a tumultuous history. It's fascinating to look at the Revolutionary War to the modern day. I know that many people refer to the US as kind of a political experiment, and I think there's so much to unpack here. But for now, that's what I've chosen. And ancestors is my word. Super important for Americans and super important for everyone in the world to understand who their ancestors are and where they've come from. But I think in the US we have a particular fascination with tracing our heritage all the way back because it does seem so distant, literally across the ocean, whatever ocean that may be. So you can see, hopefully, how this way of looking at literature, this way of presenting literature, can be super clarifying. It can be super focusing with the discussion, and it really puts the control in the student's hands to direct where the discussion would go. Obviously, a different person from a different perspective would have underlined different things for this quote, and you might be thinking, I don't like the ones that you underlined. I don't think they're very nice. That is great, and that is fantastic. If we were sitting across from each other, we could have an awesome discussion about this. So that is one of my favorite things to do with my students. It is super easy. It barely involves any preparation, and every time I've done it, the results have been really fantastic. I have done it with third graders through seniors in high school, and every single time we've always had a really interesting discussion, and I have always heard things that surprised me from the students, which is super beautiful. So that is one of my favorite things to do in the English classroom. I use it all the time, and it's minimal preparation with maximum results. It's fantastic. If you try it, let me know how it goes, and happy teaching and learning, everyone. Bye.